United States calls on South Korea and Japan to renew intelligence sharing and asks Seoul to pay more for having U.S. troops on its soil. And for deeper analysis on the defense pact between South Korea, Japan and the U.S., we're joined by Mr. Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow from the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Grant, the U.S. is asking Seoul to pay more for U.S. troops in the country. Is this something that South Korea can agree to, do you think?
They certainly can't agree to the $5 billion that the United States is suddenly asking. $5 billion is probably a fair price, but not if you're going from about 1 to 5. I would say ultimately the Americans haven't over the years have requested more support. So as a result, whenever the South Koreans said no, the American diplomats said that's okay. So to go up 4 or 5 times over what it is, that's not going to happen. There will be a small increase, I would imagine.
All right, so what are the chances of an agreement in the coming weeks then?
Well, I think they'll work something out. They always do. But at the same time, the Americans are going to have to back off that request, and the South Koreans are going to have to pay a little more. But this is definitely a delicate time. I don't think we've seen anything quite so sort of dicey in the South Korean-U.S. relationship right now. It does reflect, on the South Korean side, a strain of anti-Americanism, which has always been there in both the society and the political class. But this is, as I say, a delicate time.
Well, U.S. Secretary of Defense Mark Esper also wants Japan and South Korea to be what he called flexible with their joint military drills to support ongoing diplomatic efforts to end North Korea's nuclear program. What does he mean by that? Is he suggesting scaling back, perhaps?
I think he's trying to balance several things. First, he has to balance Japan. They want to make sure the Americans don't go too easy on North Korea by paring down exercises too much. The South Koreans would like to placate the North and have the Americans reduce their exercises. And then you have the administration, particularly President Trump, who are trying to work something out with North Korea. So they have their own interests in flexibility on what sort of exercises are done. So it's really a three-way balancing act, at least, that the Defense Secretary has to manage, and that definitely requires some flexibility.
Grant, you mentioned that U.S. has its own interests. So the request from an ally such as South Korea for cost sharing, is that a sign that perhaps maybe America is not as committed to regional security?
I really haven't seen the evidence of that. You don't see American forces pulling out of any place in the region. In fact, there's even a little more assets that are coming in. But I just don't see that. What you are seeing is a president who is, I think, fairly asking allies and partners to pay more. As I said, the U.S. government traditionally has not pushed this. So it's a bit like not going to the dentist, and then you find you've really got a problem later on, and it's harder to deal with. But so the fact that the Americans want more money isn't a sign of lack of commitment. But one does fairly ask, what is the price of the world's most powerful military? I would suggest in South Korea's case, it's a lot more than $1 billion. But at the same time, you can't suddenly spring a sort of a 500% increase on them. But it's always important to look at what the Americans actually do, not what a particular president says. That goes for Mr. Trump, went for Mr. Obama and his pivot to Asia. Look at what they actually do. But I don't think there is a lack of commitment, but there is certainly, what would you call it, sort of a sense that something needs to change. And it's creating a perception. And that's really what it is, the perception rather than any reality in terms of an American withdrawal or pullback or unwillingness to defend its partners. All administrations have to be very careful about that perception. That's very important.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing your insights with us. Grant Newsham, Senior Research Fellow from the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies.